Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
You're very welcome to this week's episode of the Signpost webinar series. My name is Cian Condon. I'm Outreach and Innovation Specialist with Teagasc and also the current coordinator of this webinar series. This morning, we're joined by two people from GlasPort Bio, by Vincent O'Flaherty, the Chief Scientific Officer, and by Stephen Fagan, who's the Business Development Manager. And they'll be telling us all about their work in reducing methane emissions from slurry. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Shaun Connolly, and Shaun is a research officer based in Johnstown Castle. He'll be interpreting the questions that come in and using his expertise, hopefully, to learn as much as we can about this subject area.
Perfect, Cian. Look, and first of all, thank you very much for joining us here this morning, guys. My name is Stephen Fagan. I'm the Business Development Manager with GlasPort Bio. I joined the business during the summer of last year for the commercial rollout of our technology, GasAbate. And I guess my background is in working with ag-tech startups and ag-tech companies, bring, I suppose, an idea to market and to bring that new types of solutions to scale up into an international stage.
Hi everybody, Vincent O'Flaherty is my name. My day job has been for a couple of decades now as a microbiology professor at the University of Galway, and I followed some lab research out of the lab and co-founded GlasPort Bio back in 2018. And my role with the company now is a part-time role. I am the Chief Scientific Officer. So I'm responsible really for the design and delivery of the R&D program, which is still ongoing, and also oversight of validation trials that we'll touch on during this morning's presentation. So thanks everybody for joining.
So just to begin, guys, our presentation here this morning is surrounding our product GasAbate, and the theme of today's webinar is reducing methane and greenhouse gas emissions from stored slurry. So just to begin, Professor O'Flaherty will just give an introduction to GlasPort.
Yeah, so thanks, Stephen. And so as I mentioned, I'm a co-founder of GlasPort, which was co-founded back in 2018. The research sort of underpinning the GasAbate product started back in 2016 or so. And with Rory Friel and Cillian O'Brien, we co-founded GlasPort in 2018. And what we're about really is looking to bring forward scientific innovations and new technologies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have two product lines, if you like. The focus of this morning's presentation is on the GasAbate, on the slurry storage treatment technology, which is at the commercial stage, as we'll talk about. We're also working on ruminant feed additive and device technologies for enteric methane mitigation. The work starts out as many science projects do, a very small scale in the lab. We were supported along the way by a number of granting agencies here in Ireland, SEAI, SFI, now Research Ireland, and the Department of Agriculture. And key for the company development really was a European grant from the European Innovation Council back in 2020. That was a €2.5 million grant, and that underpinned the development journey, if you like, from the lab right through to pilot scale. And then in February 2025, the commercial investment was closed out into the company, a €10 million investment led by the Roebuck Food Group. And that has sort of supported the commercial rollout that Stephen is going to talk about later in the presentation. What we're about really is to make measurable reductions in greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture across a number of different focus areas. And to do this in a robust way, supported by scientific validation and data, but also providing a technology platform that allows for, really strong, auditable sort of tracking, not only of the technology working, but being seen to work and the data to be captured. As we'll talk about, we've moved from the lab out into the commercial world, and then moved from Ireland into a variety of other markets across Europe. In terms of farm scale validation trials, We've been working with, I guess, the four biggest food dairy processors in Europe, and also very significant pig processors in the UK, Sweden, Denmark, Spain, Switzerland, and Germany. And all of these companies have sort of independent validation pathways and protocols. So they often work with partner universities initially to test the technology in the lab, to test it at pilot scale to make sure it works. And then from there, you go out onto an on-farm rollout. And Stephen will talk a little bit about the farm systems that we've been working on. And so those validation trials really sort of are the key to support the commercial rollout of the technology, that the people using it can satisfy themselves that it does exactly what it says on the tin, that it works, and that it works under the particular conditions that apply, for example, in Sweden, which are very different to those applying in Spain and so on. We've been socializing the technology not only in its mature state, but right the way through as the technology was developed. And a shout out to Shaun, who's joining us here this morning as the moderator. Shaun did his PhD in Johnstown Castle, supervised by Dominic Crawle and co-supervised by myself. And Shaun did great work as part of the development story, both from lab and pilot. And that developmental work has been published. From day one, we've had a sort of an open science philosophy. So every bit of the journey in terms of the various developmental stages, early formulations, early iterations has been published and available for peer-reviewed scrutiny. So we think that's very, very important. And on the commercial side, of course, the technology, both the dosing system and the approach has now been patented across the globe. And there are 24 of them now granted, covering the deployment of the technology in various settings across the EU, Japan, China, the US, and other major markets. Basically, let's cut to the chase and talk about what Gasabate is. Gasabate is essentially two things. It is firstly a system or a technological platform that's designed to dose the slurry additive into slurry. That platform is smart in the sense that it's responsive to slurry volumes and environmental conditions. And it also captures the data and sort of reassures that the system is working well and being deployed correctly. The additive that is dosed into the system is a hydrogen peroxide-based solution. It's dosed into the base of a storage tank or lagoon or internal slatted shed. The system can be deployed and applied for a variety of slurry storage system. And what it does is essentially preserves fresh slurry. It stops it decomposing. And the problem in terms of emissions is that once the slurry is stored, microorganisms work and decompose that slurry, use it for food basically. And during that decomposition, they produce gases like methane, which is lost into the atmosphere. It also produces other gases like ammonia, for example, and hydrogen sulfide. And that's our emissions problem. And the emissions problem is one side of the coin, and the other side of the coin is the loss of opportunity, because if you lose carbon in the form of methane from the slurry, its value for anaerobic digestion or for biomethane is much reduced. If you lose nutrients like nitrogen and sulfur from the slurry, its value as a fertilizer is much reduced. So what we do is we don't add anything to the slurry per se, but we preserve the quality of the slurry in terms of its organic matter content. And how we do this is by inhibiting a particular group of microorganisms that release the methane gas, the methanogens. And if you knock those out, you put them to sleep, basically the rest of the decomposition process of the slurry slows down also. The system is designed for liquid manures, and basically that is slurries anything from 2%, to sort of a pig slurry or duck slurry type of scenario, right up to 14% where you're talking about beef type slurries in certain markets. And the critical feature of the technology is that it is installed on farms in a way that is completely hands-free from the farmer. So we do not add to the farmer's workload. The farmer doesn't have to do anything or implement any change in workflow. The system is completely automated and does its thing in the background and allows the farmer to get on with the main business. In terms of on-farm impacts, the reduction in emissions is obviously key from a greenhouse gas point of view. But it also adds a number of benefits to the farmer that Stephen is going to walk through, including improved health and safety, much reduced agitation requirements, and other tangible benefits for the farmer end user that we'll come back and talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So in terms of of what we're going to put into this, if you're going to add an additive to the slurry, there's a couple of things that are very, very important. And the first of those is in terms of the safety and the environmental risk and the perception of the compounds when it comes into the market. The Gasabate active solution is essentially hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide is a chemical that's used in a wide variety of applications, from human sort of cosmetic products right through to food preparation techniques and water disinfection and so on. So it's a very well-known chemical. When it's added to an organic matrix like slurry, it breaks down into oxygen and water. And essentially those are the two residues from the Gasabate treatment. So from that perspective, you're really not adding anything at all that would raise a concern in terms of downstream use of the slurry as a fertilizer and food produced from that land. So that's a very important feature. The end product breakdown, as I say, of oxygen and water is something that, you know, from a farm application point of view, is also, like, you know, very safe and very well understood type of process. I mentioned that we had, as part of the journey, sort of been looking to do validations of various kinds, those working with commercial partners and farmers and pilot farms, including the Signpost Farms series here in Ireland that Stephen will talk about. But we've also got third-party assurances, and uniquely in terms of a slurry additive, that third-party assurance was given to us from the Carbon Trust. And what that does is it provides an opinion statement or a validation statement that Gasabate treatment of slurries will deliver a methane emission reduction of up to 78% when applied correctly. And this is important from a validation point of view, because it's the only slurry additive or slurry treatment in the world that the Carbon Trust has validated. And the reason for that is not only because of the slurry additive, but because of the dosing platform that Stephen is going to talk about. And these validations, both from the Carbon Trust and otherwise, they're a really in-depth process. So there's a deep dive in terms of the science and how the treatment works, but also how it is applied on farms, how the dosing and the treatment can be verified, and how well it can align with sustainability programs and recognized audit mechanisms, including greenhouse gas protocol. And that's sort of been an important boost, along with these other studies and trials, into getting the Gasabate system out on farm. So I think I would pass on to Stephen now to talk a little bit about what the system actually looks like from a farm point of view.
Thanks, Vince. Yeah, so just to follow on from that, I guess one thing that's very important for us is the data that's been reported back from any of the farms that we have Gasabate and our Comply 360, which is our full MRV system that backs up Gasabate on farm. So I guess, as Vincent mentioned, we have a complete hands-free dosage system that's installed as a once-off onto a farm, and that can completely automate the process for us to receive data from that individual farm back to a secure base. So any of the requirements that come from a Gasabate and a treatment point of view on farm, we have a timestamp, we have a log, a date of what the slurry level is like on any particular farm where we have our sensors and system installed. We have these records then that feed back to our system. They're completely verifiable. And when it comes to speaking with the likes of processors, retailers, regulatory authorities, there is that robustness in that data that is coming back and what can be reported upon. What does this translate to? It's audible credits. So we generate robust, audible and verifiable carbon insetting credits. So these would feed into I guess companies, organizations, I suppose, achieving those scope 3 insetting credits in their food supply chain. So as a farmer myself, I guess I'm looking at this type of a technology and I'm wondering what are the benefits that this can bring to me as a farmer. And And I guess what is the offering that ultimately Gasabate, the tangible things that we could see happen on our farm. So as we've mentioned previously, no existing changes to any of operations or activities on a farm. So once the system is deployed and is installed on the farm, whether that be through our automated system or our manual system, which I'll speak about shortly, the system is designed so that there is zero farmer input. So when that comes to the amount of additive that's left in the tanks themselves, we can actually monitor where that levels are at to schedule redeliveries. And then also regarding the different types of slurry levels within each individual tank, we can actually gauge that ourselves fully remotely. With regards to labour costs, this is probably one of the biggest, I guess, benefits that we've seen so far. And the feedback we've been getting from our farmers is over a 50% reduction in the amount of agitation that's actually been required on farm. So we are looking at this a lot more closely as a huge economic benefit. You're lowering your costs associated with agitation. We're also improving your safety around agitation because of that reduction in harmful gases coming from, particularly when you're that initial plume that comes from agitating. Nutrient retention, and I'm conscious we had there was a peer-reviewed paper only published this week. But we've a paper that was released just recently regarding nutrient retention, and it does align very well with the work that we have done to date regarding that value that can be achieved through Gasabate treated slurry. So we are seeing around a 20 to 21% increase in grass growth rates off the back of that, and that has been conducted over a couple of different soil and grass types. So what does that mean? Better use of your slurry. You're getting a better valued slurry being applied on the land, and ultimately reducing the amount of chemical or synthetic fertilizer use on your particular fields. As I mentioned, from a farm safety point of view, that reduction in odour, particularly around hydrogen sulfide, makes it a safer working environment, not just for you as a farmer, the workers, but then also for the animals themselves. So particularly during the likes of spreading and agitating, you would notice quite a significant change from an odour point of view. And then, as Vincent mentioned, just regarding biomethane, the biomethane potential from the slurry. So any of slurry that's been used as a feedstock in AD plants, we are seeing a higher value biogas feedstock being supplied off the back of it. So just to talk you through, I guess, the two different types of systems that we offer with Gasabate, and I guess this is really designed to, I guess, the requirements both from the farmer and also, I guess, the types of systems that we're working with. So what we've developed is a full MRV package where we have an automated system whereby we install a technology on the farm that is fully automated, completely hands-free. There's no intervention by anyone. And then we have our manual dosage system where we lower the upfront capex and essentially have a operative that visits the farm on a monthly or 3-week basis to treat the slurry during the storage period. So we have these two different types of options. The first one that I'll just run through is the automated approach. So as Vincent mentioned, our whole remit with regards to the treatment of the slurry in the tank, we do require an even distribution, and the additive is treated from the base of the tank itself. So it percolates up through the slurry and puts the bugs in that asleep state. So what does the installation look like? So we install a pipework system into the base of the tank. It does require the slurry tank to be emptied in order for us to conduct our work, but we install the pipework across the base of the tank. We have a PLC or basically a control panel that's installed on the shed, and this is the brains behind the technology. It's able to calculate based on the various different sensors that we've installed in the tanks how much Gasabate should be treated, and when slurry has been removed, when there's fresh slurry being added to that tank. And we do have to apply then a maintenance dose to the slurry to keep the bugs in that state. So that's then reapplied then on an automatic basis. So the system is installed into the tank. Again, there's no farmer input from day one of the system being live. There's a couple of requirements just regarding the initial setup, but ultimately that installation is conducted by GlasPort and our partners. It's a once-off installation. As I mentioned, the tank does need to be emptied for us to do this works, but it can be deployed and installed across a variety of different types of slurry storage systems, which I'll go into shortly. So the likes of slatted tanks, storage towers, plastic lined lagoons. We've probably seen most of everything now at this stage. So it's a wide variety of different systems. With regards to our manual approach, again, we do maintain our MRV, so we do still have our various sensors across the farm. We have our footprint with the tank where the chemical or additive is stored. But what it means is that we have basically a technician or an operative that visits each farm on approximately every 3 weeks to treat the slurry on that farm. So at the moment, this system is more suitable for slatted tanks. So the operative would come to the farm, they would treat the slurry, usually using a lance down through the slat, and treats the manure at various different intervals across the base of the tank. So what this allows us to do is to treat slurry, I guess, when the slurry levels just aren't low enough for us to install the pipework. But then it's also very suitable for your typical types of grass-based systems or beef systems in Ireland, where I guess the slurry would be stored for 16, 18 weeks or potentially more in the year. So just to give some variety, I guess, in terms of the installations, and we've done quite a few in various different parts of Europe now at this stage. So the first one here on your left-hand side, an above ground store, this is a photograph from one of the I guess the circular concrete tanks that we've done in Sweden. So you can see here the pipework was actually installed to the base of the tank. It is a very small, minimal infrastructure type of pipework that we were able to install into the base of that tank, and you can see it's evenly distributed. So this is completely engineered. We have a farm plan and a map that goes to each installation, depending on the amount of treatment requirements or treatment points that are on that individual tank. Similarly, this photo here is from a plastic lined lagoon, one of which we've installed in Northern Ireland. And again, we had mounted blocks into the base of the tank because it's obviously plastic lined, and we mounted our pipework to the blocks across the lagoon. Again, all of the pipework in this case is all prefabricated before we go into the tanks or go near the lagoons themselves. So it gives us, I guess, a window there that we can actually conduct our work in a very short time frame in those particular tanks. Underground slatted tanks, as I mentioned, we have a control panel that sits on the wall outside the shed. So that panel then treats the slurry into the base of the tank. All of your pipework is installed in the actual under the slats itself. And then for your grass-based systems, we have, I guess, a combination of, depending on the requirement from the farmer or the customer, we have an MRV system that can actually deliver an automated treatment to those particular farms, or we can also do our manual treatment. But again, we don't require as much gas abate, just based on the storage period not being as long. So I guess what does this mean? And I'll just use the example here in terms of reducing the carbon footprint on milk production. So far, we're seeing a 7 to 18% reduction in the carbon footprint of milk being produced on farms. We're looking at anywhere between a 0.5 to 1.5 tons of CO2 equivalent saved per cow per year. So again, this just depends on the amount of the allocation towards emissions from manure stored on that farm and how intensive the farm is. So if it's an indoor intensive type system or a grass-based system, the amount of slurry that we would see in the year. And as Vincent mentioned, we have our 78% third-party assured reduction in methane from the carbon trust. So it's the highest verified reduction in any manure management technology globally, and obviously through the carbon trust, it's their first one to globally assure. So I guess as part of that, we are working. We're working rapidly with scaling GasAbate across these various different organisations. So we're working with some of the biggest and leading European dairy and beef processors on the commercial rollout of GasAbate for these different types of systems. So I'm just going to hand it back over to Vince now, just to run through, I guess, some interesting work that we've done recently on the pig side.
Thanks, Stephen. And just before I do, I suppose in the context of the farm rollout, maybe a shout out to the Teagasc Signpost farm scheme. Our first rollout was on the Farm 0C farm down in Chinook after 2 or 3 years of work. And it subsequently, with the support of Carberry, Dairygold and other processors, rolled out onto other Signpost farms. And we had a very nice site visit actually from Teagasc folks to one of those farms recently. So I guess that, in terms of anyone who'd like to see the installation on farm, there's a mechanism there to see this thing working on an Irish farm in an Irish farm context. And huge thanks to Teagasc and to the processors for facilitating that. Yeah, so just maybe to move to a different area around emissions, and that's the link between emissions of various gases and animal performance. And this is an area that's particularly relevant when you have intensive indoor production. You see it in duck poultry production, for example. You see it particularly with pigs. And we had a hypothesis that particularly in those scenarios where the animals are living above the slatted tanks and the emissions have an opportunity, to come up and impact on the animals, that particularly reducing hydrogen sulfide and ammonia emissions would have a positive benefit, not only in terms of the emissions, but also on the animal welfare and the animal performance, and of course the health and safety of the people working in these circumstances as well. So we've validated that, I guess. We've just completed a large-scale trial with a commercial pig producer, a very modern and sort of high-end pig producer down in the southeast. A trial which looked at 3 batches of pigs, 2,400 pigs in total, and we looked at both the weaner from 28 days to 82 days and the fattener phase from 82 to 160 in rooms that were well replicated. Each set of rooms had 400 animals in it, and we had treatment and control rooms. And what that showed essentially was a significant improvement in animal performance in terms of time to finishing weight, and also an improvement in feed conversion efficiency in the animals, where the animals are consuming less feed for the same weight gain. And from an economic point of view, you bring these things together, it's about a €5 benefit per pig. And just, I think on the next slide, Stephen, we can just to do some specifics on that. What we found in this particular trial was that pigs were reaching their slaughter weight 7 to 10 days earlier. We allowed in the trial the pigs to continue for the same amount of time, and that translated to the pigs being heavier by the time they went to the factory. But the upshot is that the animals were reaching slaughter weight significantly earlier. And that has a number of implications. So first of all, if the animals are slaughtered earlier, they're not producing slurry thereafter. So you have a reduction in slurry volumes, and also you have a significant reduction in slurry emissions, therefore, per pig. We had an improvement in the feed conversion ratio, as I mentioned, and there were noticeable reduction in the odor and the atmospheric stress within the animal housing, as we've seen. And that's sort of reducing things like hydrogen sulfide is well known in the literature as being a key factor in improving animal performance. And so we were really pleased to see it in this particular setting. And I suppose it's worth mentioning that this particular farm, it's one of the newer farms constructed, if not the newest farm constructed in Ireland in the pig sector. It's a really top class farm. And we think that in maybe some older farms or other conditions that maybe aren't as optimized, we might even see a more significant benefit. But it's an important factor And we're expecting to see sort of similar follow through in some of those other areas that I mentioned, including some areas of poultry production, for example. And then the next slide, yeah. So in terms of just sort of summarizing this from at the pig sector particularly, you have a significant opportunity to do a number of different positive impacts. You have this lower footprint in terms of feed conversion and earlier slaughter, and that means that the embedded carbon in both the feed and fertilizer applications is significantly reduced. And if you use less feed, you require less land, less water, less energy in the feed production. So there's a number of areas across that feed production chain where you're impacting in terms of the carbon, the embedded carbon in the process. The hydrogen sulfide and ammonia reductions means that, in terms of the animal welfare aspect and welfare of those people working in that area, it's a very important development that you can really significantly reduce these odors. And that has a wider impact for the sector because complaints due to odor is a really significant feature in terms of planning permissions, license renewals, and issues for these farm sectors. I touched earlier in terms of the mechanism of action of gas abate. Basically, we prevent the biodegradation of organic matter in the slurry. So you stop it biodegrading. That means you don't produce inorganic nutrients, and therefore you don't lose these two emissions. The carbon value and the nutrient value that isn't lost to the atmosphere remains in the slurry, and that particularly, for example, manifests in terms of treated slurry having an anaerobic digestion value equivalent to fresh slurry. So we're not improving the biogas value of the pig slurry, we're preserving it so that it's exactly the same as fresh slurry, even if it's been stored for a few months. And that biogas, biomethane value proposition has been validated at full scale. The particular pig farm that we work with also has an anaerobic digester on site. And the same applies in terms of the nutrient value. We've just published a paper in collaboration with Queen's University Belfast this week in terms of grass growth, thanks using treated slurry, thanks to William O'Neill and Paul Williams up there. And we have a follow-up study on treated dairy slurry using a similar sort of protocol, looking at that sort of retained nutrient fertilizer replacement type benefit. And then the next slide, Stephen, I think I hand back to yourself to talk a little bit about the plans for this year.
I'm on mute. So just to give, I guess, a small run through on our commercialization journey and in terms of where we're at today. So at the end of 2025, we have installed gas abate across 25 commercially led farms, and we are on target this year with installations that we've since completed throughout 2026 to reach an additional 150 farms across this year. So I guess, the commercial journey has been quite rapid for us, and these installations are taking place all across Europe, I guess in the various different countries that we mentioned at the very beginning of the call. But predominantly in the Irish market, we're seeing the uptake, and into our some of the leading processors and retailers across Europe. So that impact is very significant. And also in terms of the amount of slurry that we would anticipate to have under our remit by the end of this year. And just to give some context as to the impact in the numbers and what that looks like, I guess for an average intensive dairy cow system, we're looking at around 100 or 200 tons of carbon being reduced on that 200 cow dairy farm. So it's approximately a ton of carbon reduced through gas abate treated slurry on that particular farm. That equivalates to driving around the world 185 times in a diesel car. So it's just to give some perspective as to the amount of carbon that would be saved. And just lastly then, on our global engagement and validation, Vincent mentioned this at the beginning of the call, that yes, we're working with a lot of the leading processors and retailers in the food industry, and I guess engaging and scaling with those companies, I guess, as we speak. We've gone through a lot of different regulatory and industry pathways to receive, I guess, the recognition that we have now. So there's a lot of collaboration with those different authorities and in different markets, and dealing with different global food manufacturers to ultimately get into their inventory and inventory profiles from a sustainability point of view, and then also to link in with the Scope 3 reduction insetting claims that they would be associated with the use of gas abate. So look, our impact, it's proven at this stage, I think, with the extensive trial work, research, and I guess independent validation that has been done by these organizations around gas abate. And again, as Vincent mentioned, we're quite open with all of our science. It is all there to see. And yeah, for anyone that's interested, we can obviously share a link to all the published research that has been conducted to date. So I guess to finish, I'm just conscious of time. So thanks to everyone for listening. And yeah, I suppose as GlasPort Bio, we're looking forward to rolling out the technology further, leading the way in this space in manure management and reducing emissions on farm. And I guess using our science to bring this to farm level, that we can deliver on those results. So yeah, look, thanks very much for listening, and we're more than happy to answer any questions that may have come in.
That's brilliant. Listen, thanks a million to both Vincent and Stephen for what has been a really clear, I think, really straightforward, and you've outlined a huge amount about the process and about how it achieves what it achieves, and comments to that effect coming in through the Q&A. Now, I have questions. I always have a question or two of my own, but given the number that's coming in, there's a huge number of questions in, so I'm going to go straight to Shaun to try and address as many of these questions as we can.
Yeah, no worries, and I'll try and be as quick as possible through a few of them. So just a few scientific questions first. So I guess, Vince, you mentioned at the start there that you have reduced agitation times, and how does that kind of operate with a reduction in ammonia emissions? Typically, when we have a natural crust on top of the slurry, we're expecting lower ammonia emissions, whereas if we're expecting a lower agitation time, we expect higher ones. So how do you see that playing out? And then also in regards to the grass growth evidence as well, I know you and Katrina sent on papers in the Q&A as well.
Yeah. So as I think I mentioned, I think the published paper on the grass growth is related to the pig slurry study, and we have work in train with Queen's, a sort of a more comprehensive story actually looking at dairy slurry impacts as well. I've seen the preliminary results, and they're positive as well. I don't expect that the number will be just quite as high as the pig slurry in terms of additional grass growth, but it is looking very positive, and we'd expect probably those trials to wrap before the end of this year, Shaun, and we'll obviously be looking to publish them as we go. In terms of the agitation question, this is one that is really sort of coming, we're learning as we go on farms. You do see a crust formation. It's easier to look at for example, in the lagoons or the open tanks where we are in Sweden or Northern Ireland with the lagoons. So you do get a slurry crust forming across the top. What we see is when you put in, and as early as this week, there was a lagoon was being emptied, and Stephen was there to witness it actually. But what you're seeing is that you don't have the same degree of separation of the material underneath the crust. So the guys can put in the pump. They pumped out the material. They didn't have to agitate it at all in that particular case. So it's really to do with the lack of the decomposition. So it is a little bit more homogeneous underneath the crust, but it's not the case that you don't get a crust forming based on what we see. I think it's certainly not as thick. We don't see sort of grass growing on the crust in the lagoons and things like that you might see otherwise. But it is a clear physical dried barrier that forms. And to be honest, the 50% agitation is kind of based on feedback that we've been getting as we're going. I imagine it is going to be storage type dependent, and it is the case that at least in some of these lagoons, the guys are able to pump them with no agitation at all. So in this particular case, it doesn't affect the drying phenomena and the crust formation at the top. It's really more about the nature of the slurry underneath.
Grant. And then just another one on the storage, then there's an interesting question that you might get quite a lot is around compatibility with aeration systems, but also with, let's say, other chemical additives, or even if you have other feed additives. Have you been testing them, or is there any research kind of coming up?
Yeah, on the aeration side, there isn't no harm will be done if you're treating the slurry with aeration and a gas abate treatment. However, they do work against each other. So the point of aeration is that you're driving the decomposition of the slurry, but you're doing it in an aerobic way, so that you're not producing methane, you're producing CO2. Whereas we actually want to lock the carbon in. So it does no benefit from combining the two for sure. And in fact, in some ways, they're at cross purposes in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So no harm will come, but it doesn't really make an awful lot of sense to combine the two together.
Yeah. And then kind of moving through to the kind of thing about storage and then through to land spreading then, have you thought about the land spreading stage as well in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and ammonia?
Yeah, I thought about it a lot, Sean, as you know,
Yeah.
but still have some work to do. So what we have clearly in the treated slurries is that there's a greater nutrient fraction in the organic. Okay, so as a hypothesis, when you take that out onto the field, that would mean that there should be a little bit of a longer gap in terms of the stuff being applied and ammonia being lost. And that's why we think we do better in grass growth. It's not that there's a huge amount of extra nitrogen going on, because the amount of the total pool lost in ammonia, as you know, is very small.
Mm.
We think that the plant benefit is to do with the nutrient availability to the plant being stretched out a little bit by the soil type of decomposition. So we have a hypothesis that it should have a good effect in terms of land spreading and application. But as you know, that's something we're still very interested and keen to work with Teagasc and others to test.
Yeah. And there's a few questions coming in around costs and just kind of in general compatibility with underground storage tanks. I know you kind of covered that a wee bit as well. Can you just touch on that as well, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so I guess just the variety of different systems, I think, Sean, just to cover first. So we've, as I mentioned in the presentation, we've probably seen more or less everything at this stage. There's a few different types of systems in Europe that I guess we are working on solutions for. But look, the vast majority of storage, different types of storage systems across Europe and indeed Ireland, we are compatible with and have a solution for. So just to give an indication with regards to the two different types, we have our manual system. So depending on the level of MRV that's required on that particular farm or requested, the capex for that, or the installation cost, is anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 to install the tank and the various couple of sensors that we require to conduct our works. The running costs associated with that is anywhere between it's €3.90 to €4.20 per ton of slurry treated on that farm throughout the year. And so again, it just completely depends on the storage period, how long slurry is in the tank, and to cover the costs of an operative going to treat that manure on the farm. And then just with regards to our automated system, again, the OPEX, so the running cost is the same. You're ultimately paying for the supply of gas abate to that farm into the treated slurry, but the capex is higher. I guess it ranges anywhere between 15 to 20,000. Basically, looking at the infrastructure that we have to put into the tanks, and also I guess the brains behind it is probably the bulk of the cost is associated regarding the actual technology that's automated on the shed. So yeah, that just gives it a very high level the various costs that are associated.
Yeah, lovely. And I get for both of you as well, there's a really nice question and a couple other questions as well around commercialization. There's one: what would be your top 3 tips for somebody thinking of stepping up from the lab to the business arena? But then also in that same vein, are there kind of barriers to scaling around like financing, incentives, things like that?
Well, I guess, Sean, I think that you touched on the biggest barrier. First of all, if any of the academic colleagues are listening, I did this as sort of a mid-career, I was going to say midlife crisis, but a mid-career crisis. But I thoroughly recommend it. It's a superly interesting perspective to go out onto the farm and to see and to follow the technology from the lab. So I thoroughly recommend that people should have a go at doing it. The biggest barrier, you touched on it, is scale. Up until pretty recently, it was very, very difficult to get funding support from grant agencies or commercial investors to take something from the lab to a pilot. But on the other hand, commercial investors aren't interested in anything that is not at least at a pilot. So there was a kind of a valley of death gap there. Now, national infrastructure, including the facility in Johnstown, for example, those infrastructural investments, are critical to enabling technologies to move from the lab. So we've seen things, for example, in Lishing recently, there's the bioscale up and other infrastructural investments, and I think that will make it easier. But ultimately, that's the biggest gap: is how do you fund something that might work brilliantly at 20 kg scale? How do you get it to a cubic meter or 5 cubic meters? Once you do get to the 5 cubic meters, our experience has been that people are very interested in helping you take it further. And then thereafter, the barrier becomes, well, who's going to pay for this, and how does it fit into, the cost models and so on. And in the European context, that seems to be really based at the moment with some of the larger processors around sustainability payments linked to scope 3 reductions, and farmers being essentially rewarded on that basis for adopting the technology. I don't know, Stephen, if you want to add to that side of.
Yeah, no, exactly that, Vincent. I suppose on the commercial side, that's probably the biggest barrier that we would see as well. So regarding the valorization of our technology, and entering into new markets, and that, I guess, everything is needing that regulatory and industry recognition to enter into the market. So as Vincent mentioned actually during the presentation, we are really socializing the technology in the various different markets that we're going to. We're allowing farmers to touch and feel it and to see it live on a farm, and to introduce it into the market is very important to us. So yeah, that valorization piece is probably the main barrier that we are finding.
And there's a really nice question as well, just in terms of the roles of the kind of 3 different really important groups in this whole chain: the farmers, the processors, and then the retailers as well. How do you kind of see getting kind of social validation from them, and what kind of role do you see for each of them kind of in the future if you were to roll this out on a kind of national scale?
It's a very good question. I guess, look, there is a lot of moving parts, Shaun, with regards to each of those different parties.
No, it's a tough question.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'll be able to fully answer it here, but I guess, look, from a farm level, and I think we kind of covered this in the slides, is like we really want to try and make sure that the farmer can benefit as much as possible from our technology, and that we're not adding to their workload in any way, shape, or form, and that we can make it as cost effective as possible. From a processor retailer point of view, we do want to make sure that farmers are incentivized to adopt this type of a technology on their farms, and that they are receiving that recognition from the processor, from the retailer, and from industry. I guess reducing greenhouse gas emissions, it's not, I guess, looking at farmers, we wouldn't like to say it's a farm problem, and it's more in the production of food, and that everyone is involved in that, so I think that decarbonisation process involves all the parties being involved, and just to make sure that ultimately those who are bringing this type of technology onto their farm are recognised and rewarded for that.
Yeah.
And I think if I can add to that, is Stephen, one of the things that's changed, Shaun, in the last year to 2 years is that we're increasingly talking with where you have, the retailer or the food supply company together with a processor, working together, thinking about that supply chain a little bit more, and working together to support pilot rollouts. That's been a change that's very helpful for us from our point of view, and then the farmer is brought into it because it's there has to be clarity in terms of reward to the farmer for implementing this, if that implementation is helping in the market for sale of the product. So there does seem to be a kind of more sort of processor retailer type conversations where everybody's in the same room over the past couple of years. That's been a big change I've noticed since when we started this.
Great. And then just in terms of MRV then, can you just explain what that is just for people who don't know, and also why it's so important, especially kind of for validation as well?
Yep. So I guess MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification is what the acronym stands for. But I guess it's important for us, particularly well across a few different aspects, really. But for us to maintain the level of integrity behind our system and to ensure that gas abate is being used correctly on farm. We do, I suppose, want to have that data to report back to us, and we do so through this MRV system. So I guess it's to maintain the robustness of the technology to ensure it's being used correctly on farms, and also then that the data that is being reported on a farm, that it's if that is to be used in a third party setting, for example, a retailer or a processor is looking to make a claim regarding their reductions in their carbon footprints, whether it be milk or meat production. They can go to the Carbon Trust, for example. They can apply for that certificate, and they can reap the rewards of it from that front. So the MRV is very important for us. It's a very important aspect of it, just from an operational point of view. But then also, I guess the data that we do collect is ultimately extremely important from a market ready point of view.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that as well, like ultimately, valorizing these emission reductions or valorizing these, the fertilizer benefits or whatever else, that's actually the biggest barrier, Shaun, to getting these things on farms. And that valorization is going to require, depending on the setting, it's going to require some element of regulatory acceptance or some element of an audit trail. And so we felt for a long time that having something that the farmer buys and having sort of a buying record as being the basis for the audit just wouldn't cut the mustard. I mean, you are going to be held to account for any claims you make, and therefore being able to really show, look, the stuff has gone in at the slurry, it's gone in at the right time, it's gone in at the right amount, and the farmer doesn't have to worry about that. That just happens. Is something that we think is going to be extremely important in terms of getting these things not only implemented but getting the required acceptance of the various regulatory bodies or retail or the market that ultimately allows the farmer to valorize the value.
No, it's a great point. And then just in terms of that, then in terms of kind of recognizing the emissions, then there has been a couple of comments just in terms of the TAMS grants, getting involved in that, but then also the EPA, the inventory as well. I suppose it's kind of outside of the scope, both of those topics for the Teagasc point of view, getting the science out there and kind of letting policymakers make their own decisions. But if you just want to touch on that in terms of what you think what you think in terms of the TAMS grants and getting onto that list, and also in terms of being used in the inventory as well.
Yeah, so look, maybe I'll touch on the TAMS first and Vince, the EPA stuff. But look, I guess we are going to be in a position, Shaun, where this system will be on the TAMS list. We're hoping for it to be available into next year. So I guess for farmers, and look, it'll be a huge bonus for us to have this sort of a technology being available through a TAMS grant onto a farm. It'll be a massive milestone for ourselves, ultimately, particularly in the Irish market. So we are working with the various bodies to ensure that application goes smoothly and that we are available coming into the next round of TAMS. And maybe Vince on the other side.
The TAMS is is a number of different elements. Emissions reduction is just not one of them, but there are other elements that Stephen touched on.
Yep.
Yeah, on the inventory, I think we're on a journey in Ireland in terms of working out the processes and how to get to the inventory. Ultimately, it'll be about more validation, robust science, independent trials, to the point where the regulators can be comfortable in terms of what claims are made. And we're, as you know, Shaun, we're very keen that we continue the process. The farm rollout is very helpful because ultimately you've got to have an activity. This thing has got to be shown that it's scalable and that's something you can roll out. and that you can account for on one side of the coin, and on the other, just making sure that in terms of the trial results and the trials, filling any gaps that are there. And so we're working, intensively on that, and have very positive conversations with regulators in Northern Ireland and with the EPA here in the Republic. But that is ultimately our goal. Absolutely, is that this would be recognised in the inventory, and that there would be a wider national benefit out of it. And we're very keen that to do whatever is needed to make that happen.
Try and
Lovely.
fit one more maybe, or that, Shaun, if you have a last question there to.
Yeah, just one last question, just around AD. I know there was a question on just the lack of AD reactors in Ireland, and kind of that whole theme of mitigation and adaptation as well. I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that as well, just in terms of the usefulness of the gas bay product, both in terms of reducing emissions, but also that uplift in biogas potential as well, and kind of where you see that kind of industry going in the next few years as well.
Yeah, so we're perfectly compatible with AD. The oxygen that's produced doesn't hang around. It's gone in minutes or hours, and therefore you go straight in. We're not either biocidal. We don't actually kill the methanogens. So if you don't repeat gas abate treatment according to the protocol, eventually you'll start to see methane coming off the storage slurry. So it's perfectly compatible with AD. Where we'd see the benefit is that feedstocks that are currently not regarded as being very good for AD at all, like the likes of pig slurry, for example, where the value is lost so quickly, suddenly become live prospects. So we have one now example of the pig producer we're working with is putting in an AD system supported by SAAI, and the main feedstock will be pig slurry, and that is enabled because he's using the gas abate treatment. So we think we think it'll support the wider biomethane rollout, John, and we'd like to think that the slurry value being maintained would hopefully support developers and farmers that are in that space. I agree, we're behind. There's no doubt about that. But the likes of the Ballinrobe, the Nathan project coming on stream, and others coming on stream this year, shows, I suppose, the direction of travel. And I have no doubt that it will be a big contributor, and that, I said, I think we'd be hoping to support that.
Brilliant.
Just a few things, just to wrap up here. We've had a huge number of questions in. Shaun did exceptionally well in amalgamating and trying to cover as much of it. There was no way that we're all going to be covered. Perhaps we might be able to look for an FAQ or something from the lads that we can get out to the people. I also, just to remind people as well, that this goes out as both, it's available on the Teagasc YouTube channel, on that'll be available, it could be even this evening, so available very quickly, and as a podcast next week. So you can listen back to this again within the coming days if you feel you missed out. I just mentioned too is, look, up until I started the closing spiel, is nearly everyone who joined the webinar was still on the webinar. So there was huge retention. Everybody, the number of people hugely interested. And for myself, I coordinate the Teagasc Connected program, is that perhaps this is an area that we need to look at, a targeted event or something like this for professionals in the sector, because there's obviously huge interest in it. My thanks to Vincent and Stephen today. Really interested in learning more. I think it's a fantastic area, as I could say all the audience that are here today. Shaun, really well done on your work this morning. You obviously have a lot of insights and knowledge on this area too. Next week, if you're not aware of it, today is the start of Biodiversity Week. So next week we're joined by Sarah Kavanagh from Johnstown Castle, and she'll be presenting Beast of Burden, how we can enhance biodiversity on farmland. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks a million.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.